It's totally at their discretion. I mean, at the meeting, we encouraged them to show up if they had follow-up questions or clarifications. But I think, as you saw too, we're also encouraging people to send questions and comments through June 22nd as an initial period, just so that that helps us on whatever they heard at the first meeting. So that helps us, plan for the next meetings. And we're also recording this and we'll post them. So just so you're aware of that.
Okay.
And if you want to, again, I'm Elisa Shen from the City of Berkeley, and I have my colleague,
Abby Thorne-Lyman with BART.
So if there are questions about process that you may have heard from the June 8th meeting, or content or anything like that, feel free to ask away.
Well, I just didn't really have any questions. I thought maybe more people would be here speaking.
That's fine. We can wait for others to join. We can just mute our lines and he pops in.
I'm just curious, was the idea about office hours, we're doing that new, was that clear as to what this kind of was? Sorry. Hi, Peter. Well, I was just curious, Michelle, whether the whole idea of office
Hi,
hours.
guys.
What is it?
Oh, I was just wondering whether the idea of office hours, in terms of just open Q&A like that came across.
What I wrote down in my notes to listen in. Yeah, I don't have anything off the top of my head.
Okay.
We're waiting for other people.
Okay, well, welcome to, we have two CAG members that are joining us, Peter Waller and Haley Courier. Hi there.
Hi.
Abby Thorne-Lyman from BART, and I, me, Elisa Shen from the City of Berkeley, are here with another member of the public, Michelle, and Karen. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Karen should be on shortly from Van Meter Williams Pollock. Let me just help her with a tech question. Let's see.
I want to say hi to Abby too. We are in work. We're work colleagues, and here I'm I'm in my volunteer role.
Right. Yes.
I was going to just make small talk while we're waiting with Abby too about how's the BART ridership going? Are people coming back? What's it look like so far?
Well,
And we will come back, Abby. We'll come back.
Yeah. We were at 7%. We were at 7%, and I think now we're up to 8%. So people have come back. Some people, they haven't restored service yet, but they added another train on the Concord line, on the Pittsburgh Bay Point line, that I think begins at Pleasant Hill. And I think the cool thing about BART is because the Fairgate system, they're just tracking real-time data.
Yeah, right.
Every day. So they're able to say,
Yeah.
more people are getting on at Fruitvale, let's run trains from Fruitvale. And
Yeah, right.
Right.
Interesting.
As opposed to a lot of the bus systems, especially when they're not taking fares, it's really hard to track ridership.
right, you don't have that real-time data. So
Yeah.
it's hard though, and they're going to be trying to pass a budget next Thursday, but it's going to be a quarterly budget.
Yeah.
We have no idea what is going to happen.
Right.
So we're just taking it month by month, I guess.
Yeah, day at a time.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd get back on, but I have nowhere to go. So,
Yeah, I think they're kind of modeling, up to 50% recovery in this coming fiscal year. That would be good news, I think. So.
50% recovery in terms of BART fares?
BART ridership. That they're going to be they're trying to model a budget for the coming fiscal year, which is a real problem for public agencies right now.
Oh
So,
my golly. Can't imagine.
so we may have enough folks, Elisa, is 3 CAG members and 1 community member, a quorum.
Oh, there's Karen. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Karen.
Hello.
So thanks for joining first ever, or I shouldn't say ever, first that I know of, virtual office hours. We are trying this out. We have myself, we have Karen Murray from Van Meter Williams Pollock, and we have Abby Thorne Lyman from BART. And we are hoping to, get more comments or questions that you had, clarify anything that we could now, and also just take down your questions, for further consideration as we're trying to map out like the next steps and how this all works with a virtual format that doesn't lead to, 8-hour meetings sitting in front of a screen or something like that. So we appreciate like any thoughts or feedback that you have.
And I appreciate this because it saves writing a very long email. Because I took some notes after our first CAG meeting about some thoughts I had and a concern and some concerns. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to put a lot of time into making this cogent and in the public record forever, which is always a little scary. Not that this isn't being recorded, but still, it's a slightly more, the slightly more immediate informal approach I think is helpful. So I appreciate this.
Great. Does anyone want to start us off? We can clarify things about, I guess, the process moving forward, or, we got some good comments at the meeting, but I won't, let's start us off fresh. And I have these notes and I can supply, comments about like what we heard on the 8th as well. It's kind of open format if you guys want to start.
I have 2 things I'd like to say, if that's okay.
Sure.
First of all, I think it was Haley's comments echoed by others that I really want to emphasize the concern that we have really no specifics around what it is we're supposed to deliver. I know we talked about that the other night, but it's been on my mind a very great deal. I'm in a previous life, I did a lot of facilitating, and so normally I would sort of look at the structure of what we have going forward, and almost one possible thought for organization is that there are areas of interest and concern. 1, what kind of housing do we need and who should it be to? 1, access, which is obviously, as our nominal representative of the Hills, access is going to have to be my jam, even though I realize it's a part of many priorities, but I will take that on. And there are various streams that came up in our discussions, and one way of dealing of creating a set of recommendations that makes sense might be to organize it around that. I mean, I think our first meeting was a lot of information that we needed. You sent us a couple of 100 pages to read if you actually drilled down to all the links. So there was a lot for us to prepare for as well. And I think that some of the first meeting of coming up to speed was a very good thing, especially to get the presentations that you guys did for us. Thank you, Abby, that was very helpful, and Karen too. But we need to get our arms around how we're going to organize how we do things and take on each of the various issues and components of this, look at them individually so that they're in bite-sized bits that we can grab onto, and then step back and look at that as an integrated whole where we balance out the many priorities of what these projects are trying to serve. Because even just the agencies, it's like you want to increase ridership, okay, but we need housing. I mean, there are things that might have some internal conflicts. So that was the first point I wanted to make, and I wanted to thank Haley for bringing that up the other night. And I think, Peter, you said something about it as well. I think that reflected the thoughts of all of us, even those who didn't speak up. And then my second thing, which I'm happy to defer a little bit, but I want to get it out there, is KTVU just wrote something about the West Oakland project, which I guess has now been greenlit. And, 762 housing units, 50,000 feet of retail, 300,000 of office. You might want to rethink the office thing, but before anyone breaks ground. But at the time when those decisions were made, what a wonderful thing. I mean, office jobs and services for the community and the neighbors, and 762 housing units. But in here, and Abby, this question is for you. I believe, I don't know if it's a quote or they got it wrong or whatever. The mixed use complex will be built on existing parking lots at the West Oakland station, according to agency officials, that's you, who estimate that 55% of the riders who park at the station will continue to use the transit system. Does that mean that 45% will not? Because when I raised access the other night, you did mention that our buses go to downtown, which they do, but anyone who's ever lived in the hills and tried to take the bus knows it does not work. Not on a regular basis. Many people in the hills aren't anywhere near those bus stops. The hills are exactly what they are, hilly. So doing errands and things is pretty difficult. And there's also very little to get downtown in terms of what you need in terms of daily life. So I'm happy to defer the access question, as I realize it is one of many topics. But I read that and I was like, okay, there you go. So that was something I wanted to get a little more clarification on. And then I'm also going to ask you to bear with me because I haven't had lunch. So I'm going to try and eat very not visually challenging, but I must eat something. I can take my video off while I eat.
It's all right. It's your choice. We've all been there. You must eat.
Do you want me to answer that question, Elisa?
If you'd like, and if you go for it, and then we can go around.
I'll talk a little bit about it. I think the important thing about, we do look at this for every station, and that 55% is our, what we kind of call our ridership recapture rate. It is the percent of riders who currently are going to the station who, we think will continue to take BART in some capacity. It is a number that was specifically derived for West Oakland, and I'll just say West Oakland has some very unique patterns that other stations don't, that really have dictated the access assumptions for the TOD project, because a lot of folks who are getting on the system at West Oakland are driving from many, many points in the region and getting as close to San Francisco as they possibly can, and then hopping on BART. And so it serves a very odd function, because like folks going to the Symphony, for example, who might live in Union City, would drive to West Oakland so they would be on BART for as short a time as possible. And we are assuming they would have the opportunity to get on the BART system in a different place. But it is indeed assuming that 45% of folks who are currently parking at that station may take a different mode. They might decide to drive to the Symphony. And what that is balanced out by when we're doing the model is looking at the folks who are going to get on who live more immediately, and the ridership increases from the folks in the TOD project. So yeah, for that particular modeling, it is a numbers game of thinking about what other options people might have, thinking about what percentage of folks we might recapture who could maybe go to a different station or take a different mode. And we are very aware of the challenge in the hills. I think that's going to be a huge topic for our access study. And we are very much a partner with AC Transit. So if folks are commuting to San Francisco and driving down to the North Berkeley BART station, and they have the option of taking the H bus, the Transbay bus, I actually live on the bus line, and I think I would probably take the bus to San Francisco if I had a job in San Francisco. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at them going to other modes and the viability of that. Would they bike to downtown Oakland instead? So yeah, it is true. You have hit on, that is exactly how we do it.
Okay. Because if we get TOD in Union City, there's nowhere to get on the train there either. Anyway, we can go, this will no doubt come up again, but I appreciate you answering my initial question.
Mm-hmm.
Can I'd like to build on what Elizabeth said. You might guess not about the access one, but about the.
Which is more important, I think, at this stage.
Yeah, so I appreciate you raising that. I feel like you all heard loud and clear the concerns about kind of structuring what we're actually delivering and where the opportunities are for us to basically hash out these issues. I think that there's an exciting opportunity for us to not just like get into our corners and say like, I'm this type of person and this is what I'm standing for, but like force us to reckon with the trade-offs. So I was wondering if you, given that you heard that at the meeting, if you had any thoughts about next steps in terms of shaping that and what the agenda might look like next time, to like what piece of that we might be working on or anything like that. And basically feedback or your response to that issue.
I mean, I guess I'll start, and then Karen, if you want to chime in. I mean, I think that's one of the very next steps that the consultant team is working on, various options that city and BART team is gonna look at. But basically, because we have this timeline related to coming up with zoning for with the BART MOU, with the MOU that the city has with BART and AB 2923, we are trying to think of ways that we can combine the CAG meetings as well as potentially the community meetings that we have planned, so that we can maximize the opportunities where people have the chance to hear and comment on the issues at hand, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of information that we need to provide, right? And analysis that we need to do. So I think that, what we're looking at right now, and we haven't worked it out or determined a final agenda yet, is that we're going to need to utilize like the community meeting time as well, and not just the CAG meetings, to be able to, as well as time outside the meetings, to be able to provide information, right? Like everything's not going to happen at the CAG meeting. There's going to need to be some things, whether they're either videos or sessions outside of the CAG meeting to review, let's say, to be able to have meaningful comment like at the meeting. And then Karen, I don't know if we might still need to have some time to go through this, but if Karen, you want to outline some of the thoughts for the structure of how we're going to go through things.
Yeah, sure. And it is because we have such a limited number of meetings, like Elisa said, we don't get to break out each issue. Like Peter and I just went through a couple year process where you can have a meeting every month and look at one issue at a time, which seems really luxurious now. And so we're trying to figure out how to structure it so that you all can have meaningful input and have a lot more back and forth. Also, I feel like the first meeting was so much information that there wasn't that much opportunity for that. So what we're looking at for the next 3 meetings is, and as Elisa said, the community meetings, is the next one we'll be looking at kind of frameworks, we're calling them, for the stations. So just initial passes at potential street patterns and how the blocks might break up, and just really big, broad looks at each of the stations, and start there as a way to get feedback from you and input on what you think about what if at North Berkeley, you had, different kinds of street patterns. Does the bus come through, or does it stay on Sacramento? What kinds of issues come up? Like those kinds of things are the things that we're thinking that we'll be talking about. And then, moving on, we'll be starting to look at development alternatives for the stations, and then trying to get to what, the zoning might be. And I think that we've been looking at this also as sort of like there's 2 pots. And I think Elisa tried to explain this at the last meeting. There's what goes into the zoning bucket, and then there's what goes into the development parameters bucket. And I think that the CAG will have input into both of these things. So there's what's required for zoning for the AB 2923. So those are very specific. And then there's what other pieces of zoning might the city be able and the community be able to shape a little bit more. Then there's building on the processes that happened before. What are the community recommendations? What does the community want for the stations, right? Which is more than just the zoning. and there's, you know, there's physical characteristics and also, you know, other community benefits like affordable housing or open space, and where should that go, and what, you know, what do we think about it? So I think that all of those things are what we're hoping that you will have the chance to let us know how that should be shaped, right?
So can I just clarify something, make sure I'm
Sure.
understanding correctly? It sounds like you're kind of using the CAG as like as a body to give feedback, as opposed to a group that needs to come to consensus. Because if you're saying, so it's like, we'll give feedback on these things. So it's not actually requiring, I think affordable housing, let's be real, that's a very contentious topic. What's the percentage of affordable housing? What's the number of affordable housing units? So it's just like, I could guess what a lot of people would say on that topic based on what they said at the last meeting. And so it doesn't sound like you're going to ask us to like grapple with the trade-offs there. You're just going to get our feedback and then
Well,
move it forward.
No, I wouldn't put it that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that there's a line between consent, you know, I guess it wouldn't say like you're advisory to the planning commission. And there's also, you know, I think the tricky thing here is that there's BART and the city, right? In terms of different parameters of what will make a project feasible. And so I think that in terms of what the example that you bring up in terms of affordable housing targets, like we will absolutely be looking at different site planning and development scenarios, and our consultants will be doing economic feasibility analyses to have people understand the trade-offs between different options, which allow for more or less build out, more or less parking, which plays into the economic feasibility. So, you know, whether or not this body, I mean, you know, we were thinking of it as, you know, this is a working group with people with very specific, you know, values and expertise, a complementary set of values and expertise that can speak to like the different set of issues that have been expressed during the community processes to date. So, I mean, I think that you know, if there were consensus on issues, that would, you know, in theory, would be amazing, but it's right now without having gotten into it, and there are two different stations and different values, you know, I mean, we'll have to see, you know, where the conversation goes for this body.
I don't think consensus needs to be the goal. I mean, there's 15 of us. There's a bunch of different priorities.
Right. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
So, but isn't it, I guess I'm wondering if what I'm concerned about is that it's just like a list of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like, you can get that at a community meeting, you know, you can get all the variety of feedback, but I think the advantage of having a CAG is that there's some sense of us having me having to tell Elizabeth, like, I know that parking, you know, for people who live in the hills is important, but what I care about is X, and how do we put those two things together? And so I guess I'm wondering, is there an opportunity for that, or is it, are we just giving, you know, kind of giving, you're going to give the scenarios and we'll give thoughts on the scenarios? That's what I'm trying to distinguish.
I think there's an opportunity for that. I think especially with the, we'll be doing the transportation analysis, looking at different options, and also the economic analysis that Elisa mentioned, so that there's information and trade-offs, right, that will be discussed, and it would be amazing to have everybody come together. I mean, that would be the ideal goal. I think Elisa's not, you know, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think we could present that as a goal.
No, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it that we're all going to agree. I'm
right,
just
you know, I know
the difference between. I know housing politics. I know what's happening, but just the distinction between like eliciting feedback and forcing a more of a, you know, grappling with the trade-offs.
I mean, I go further to even say, if we don't have a structured approach to what we're supposed to be contributing. Whether it's consensus or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't even know at this point how we would record anything that we are reacting to.
Mhm.
I mean, just sort of you guys bringing us topics and then having us go around the room and say, well, as my citizen of Berkeley, the United States, and the world, I care about housing, et cetera. As the person that represents this particular aspect of this, I want to raise this point. I mean, I can send you an email and be done.
Mhm.
I mean, I can do that now. I mean, I very much look forward to learning the ins and outs of all of this, because everything, you know, if it, as I'm fond of saying, if it were simple, we would have fixed it by now. But, you know, we don't need 15 already fairly active, fairly committed Berkeleyans, because that's how we all got here, to just know more about what needs to happen.
Right.
If that's all we're going to do, I got better things to do.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Elisa. Lisa, you're muted. Hang on. She's saying something very important, I'm sure.
We always say our best stuff on mute. That's a rule.
It's not working, Elisa.
Oh, so frustrating. I'm sorry, Lisa. I see that you really want to respond to us.
Muted.
Wait, there you
Okay,
go.
now you're not. You're good.
Oh my goodness.
heard you.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't muted. That's why I was looking so pained. Like, what is the problem here? So I guess I just wanted to go back a moment and also hear if Peter or Michelle have something to say, because we haven't heard from them yet. But just to go back to that notion of like it not being clear about what the CAG is supposed to be working on. And so I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, going back to that graphic, and I can pull it up again, but what we were talking about, how all these different aspects that go into site development in terms of density, height, parking, levels of affordable housing, et cetera, like those, the most tangible thing that we have a deadline for is zoning regulations. You know, and the zoning regulations need to have environmental reviews, so there will be an EIR that we're also trying to fit into our schedule that has legal rules for public comment. And so that is a very tangible written document, and the Planning Commission has to hear about, you know, and we'll review drafts in terms of what the zoning says. And like Abby and others have said, we are somewhat constrained by AB 2923 and what the zoning needs to allow. And BART is coming out with more of a public guidance document related to that. There's another, so that's one written document that's very specific. And then what we're calling that other bubble in the graph that we had, there's zoning regulations, and then there's the development parameters. Those are things that, you know, will find their way, or most likely will find their way in a request for proposals that BART issues, typically issues for their properties. And what goes in there is, you know, I think wanting to listen to the community, and a lot of that goes into first BART and the city's parameters in terms of, you know, infrastructure, operation, ridership, those, you know, and also what money is available, and given limited timeframes for low-income housing tax credits, et cetera. It's also a question of the community and elected decision makers to consider timeframes and trade-offs that way. So there's a lot of trade-offs and conversations that the CAG will have. We also want to have those conversations at broader community meetings. And so that's the other bucket. So there's zoning, written zoning regulations, and then there's things about, like, we want to have what, it won't be the actual design of the development, but it will be aspects that will be direction to potential developers of what the city and BART need to see in any development proposal. Is that more, give more clarity to what you're working on?
Can I just say, and can you guys hear me? I keep turning my video off, so because it keeps blanking out, but people are nodding, so I think so.
You're
I
good.
think you know, I'm certainly on the same page about wanting to understand what our output is of this, and I would agree with Elizabeth Haley, you know, and more structure is better. We can always break the structure, but give us some to start with. But I think and also what Haley said about WEAP is an amazing opportunity. I mean, I'm sure we all see that. And I think that's, Elizabeth, why it might be worthwhile for us all to show up. And I know you're committed to it, to set some sort of example of how a city with a million different ideas actually comes together around some ideas and actually does some hard work on choices. And I do believe in that. But I think, Lisa, what you're touching on is kind of where I go, and it's in part because it's the box I live in the, you know, in this sort of transit-oriented development world, is that in the best sense, we are writing the RFP for the development team, right? We are setting out the parameters. And then these teams are going to come and compete for this project. And they are, hopefully we're going to set a lot of pretty specific goals, but they're going to compete on who can deliver, you know, the highest percentage against those goals. You know, we want 100% affordable or whatever it is. You know, they can deliver X or so on and so forth, this much parking, all this stuff. Because all of this is complex, you know, it's going to be a development team, what they can do with funding. And so it's setting up parameters in which we want those teams to come to us with proposals and compete. And because we can't stipulate anything unless we're going to write the checks. And I mean, that's a very, you know, offhanded way of putting it, but you understand what I mean? So, but I think thinking that way, and I actually think it might be helpful to look at some examples of, you know, I don't know if Abby has good examples of, you know, here's what an RFP looks like for one of these big sites, you know, and these are the parameters that a team was looking at. It just gives us a set of wheels to turn. So it's one aspect of this. There's something else I was going to say, but I forgot it. So anyway, I just want to put a vote in for looking at some models.
And Peter, I just want to, sorry, Haley, is it okay if I respond? Or yeah, I mean, just that has been something that and Rachel from BART is on as well, that we've been discussing, that is the ideal end outcome of this is for BART is to move into a solicitation and have you be establishing the parameters. And I think so long as what the CAG can come up with what results in a feasible development, that is where we would end up if we feel like there's been some level of consensus reached and we've come up with something that is viable. That is definitely something we've talked about.
And I think, oh, Haley, go ahead.
Well, Elisa, what you said was actually really helpful. And so now I can like give you some clear questions that maybe you can then give answers to, not right now, but like I'm looking at this focus on the CAG and committee in the process slide. And I'm like, okay, the zoning regulations bucket. Okay, so what's actually on the table? Because we know that there's already a 7-story minimum. So we can't go under that. So what is the range of things that we're talking about? Do we have to come up with a cap, or we already, you know, like tell me very specifically, okay, then when we're talking about step downs, what is the range of options for step downs? And then maybe help me think about what I need to weigh when deciding, you know, what do I think about step downs, or think about FAR or whatever. I'm just squinting at my thing. And then parking, you know, I work at Transform, we have a lot of opinions about what's on the table when it comes to parking. And then, you know, what are the 3 things that we get to weigh in on? So that would help me be a more productive member of the group.
And that would also help with, I mean, I'm happy you're going to tell us about the sites, but if we don't have a sense of what's on the table, there's a piece of me is like, we want to do the zoning, fine, just pass zoning that's compliant with the law. Check, done, move on. Because to me, the interesting thing is, how do we want the development to look? And then we should do the zoning afterwards. So if we have to meet a zoning deadline, then let's meet the zoning deadline by complying with state law.
I mean, that's exactly right. Where we might not have as much flexibility with the zoning as we might like to shape the development that the community wants, we're having that conversation concurrently. You know we have to do certain things about the zoning, but the conversation is, even if it doesn't end up in the zoning, we're having this conversation now because it will end up, we hope, you know, in various set of development parameters that would go in an RFP. And we're also trying to respond to, you know, a landscape that, you know, we put our pencils or stick in the ground for the assumptions that we have right now. And as we go along, there will be changing assumptions about funding or more information we find out about. And that's partly why, you know, our next CAG meeting is when it is. We're trying to do more study regarding, you know, any development, for example, at Ashby with like vertical circulation and other things. Like, it's like a heavy duty infrastructure cost and burden, you know, along with everything else. So we're trying to make this with assumptions as real as possible so we can have this, you know, have this discussion. Am I over? Is that a good way to describe it, Karen? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, right. We're trying to pose realistic scenarios that would look at a range of different things, right? And then get your reaction to them, and also while also learning, looking at the economics of them, looking at, you know, other issues related to them, so that we can bring the knowledge that our studies reveal to you, if that makes sense, to, you know, so that there's more of a, you know, we're trying to fill out that information and have pros and cons and things that can be weighed. So you can look at, you know, this much open space, you might get less housing, or this much affordable housing, you might get less open space, or whatever it is, so that there are concrete things so you can see the trade-offs and have a conversation around them.
Sorry, I know I'm taking up a ton of space, but I have to jump off, and I just wanted to put one more question out that I'd like to know at some point, which is the budget that we're working with, and how that is going to play into the trade-offs, especially around affordability. If that's something that we can share in the future.
Some of which is probably driven by the availability of grants and that kind of stuff, right? I mean, you pick one approach and that's got funding streams, and other approaches don't.
yeah, I mean, for example, that's something in the economic feasibility, you know, depending on the scenarios of like yay tall, how many units, levels of affordability, levels of parking, you know, we'll have numbers. Our consultant will be generating numbers of like, well, to do this much affordable housing in these scenarios, you need X million dollars of public subsidy. And that means, you know, so there'll be information about, well, if you did, for example, or if you did this much market rate and this much whatever, the market rate could subsidize the affordable housing to this extent. So that's the kind, if you're talking about the budget, there will be information about like, well, here's the subsidy, here's the gap, or if you did this other mix of housing, then you know, the development could pay for either open space or more affordable housing. If you did less parking, then that money could go to other things instead of building parking. You know, I mean, so those are the kind, you'll get an idea of like orders of magnitude of those numbers and what the trade-offs are.
And Elisa, just to build on that, the MOU state towards the end of this calendar year, the city is supposed to make some decisions around funding for affordable housing. I think that might be, we haven't discussed, you know, because this process got started a little bit late, that might get staggered a little bit, but it is sort of, it's not an input, it's hopefully an output. I think would be some of the analysis would help inform the city's decisions on that.
Can I I want to mention one quick thing, and that's a helpful reminder, Abby, but it's in response to Haley before you go, or it's something I want, not directly in response, but I want you to be aware of. Another question is because I think it's going to be super critical, is the whole access study process, which was touched on in the presentation. And I think some of us probably understand what those studies are in quite a lot of detail, and some of us less, but usually, Abby, to be clear, that happens after developers selected. And it's really that study that sets the details of transit access, which has a lot to do with how roadways are configured, and it sets details of parking for patrons and all sorts of access, all kinds of access. But and Blaine pointed this out at the first meeting, it could be really a challenge to have that come later, because at North Berkeley, all the questions around what are the right numbers in terms of parking replacement and all the other access issues, we're only going to be able to go so far, and then the response is going to be, well, that'll get studied in the access plan. And at North Berkeley, excuse me, at Ashby, all the same questions. And the other one of particular interest to me, you know, we're interested in narrowing Adeline down, that ridiculous boulevard through the middle of the thing. And, you know, we see it as a public open space. You know, Charles is on the line, he can jump in, but, you know, maybe that's a permanent home for the flea market. But can we really go there full force if we think that's collectively is a good idea without the access study? And so that's just something I want to, because I think we're going to, and someone has said it, the zoning in a way is going to sort itself out because there's so many parameters already. This access issue, I think in a way is where we'll spend more time.
Yeah, I do want to just, Peter, really quickly respond. You know, this has been really on our minds, and Rachel who's now on, and I thought a lot about this last year, and so we did apply for a state and a federal grant, and we did find out last week that we were awarded the federal grant. So we don't know quite when the money is going to come in, and because it's federal, I'm going to guess it's going to be another 6 to 9 months at least. So we will have some outside money that we'll be able to work with. It's for the access component, it's like $200,000. It's not, we're really hoping we get the state grant, which Rachel really spent a lot of time on, but we won't hear about that for another month or so. So we're hoping we can do a little bit more work in advance, but I don't know how the timing of that money coming online is going to work with the CAG. So that's something we still are trying to iron out.
We could loan you the money beforehand.
Collectively.
Yeah,
This is Lily.
Thank you.
Oh,
that information
thanks, Haley.
is really good news.
Yeah,
Um,
congratulations.
that we have that, and we're waiting to hear about the state grant. And I think that's one of the examples where our project is nimble and reacting to like real-time information that we get in terms of how much, because it's a point well taken, like how much we can start as soon as we can and fold into this effort right now versus stuff that will come online 6 months down or something like that. But I think that's what something that we'll continue to talk about, and Karen's aware of, and Kittleson, you know, who's on the team, is aware of. So we're trying to figure out how we can fold that in strategically and efficiently.
Karen, can I ask that as you guys are presenting what I heard to be scenarios, including economic analysis, that includes your assumptions around infrastructure? Because to me, it seems like a very difficult thing to estimate the infrastructure costs without the access plan at Ashby BART. In particular, given that infrastructure, and as an affordable houser, one of the things that I'm thinking about with the lens here is what are the sort of the cost of entry to develop these sites, which really is the infrastructure cost, and whether affordable housing can support that on its own, or is going to need, you know, really truly need market rate partners or components to be able to be feasible on these sites. So I'd really appreciate understanding what your infrastructure assumptions are, given that there's not an access plan yet, so that that's transparent to everybody and we can sort of see, you know, best case or worst case scenarios of infrastructure costs for the different scenarios.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and then to Haley's earlier point, I think it would be helpful, you know, in the different scenarios that you present, and what I was hearing is the trade-offs of height and parking and all the different components, to have those paired with here's what a scenario would look like, here's what the corresponding zoning would be, and whether it would or would not meet, would or would not exceed the state requirements. Because those can often be really hard to visualize abstractly.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
we could definitely do that. In terms of the infrastructure, we're definitely will be looking at the costs of what the infrastructure is and weighing those costs against the feasibility of the project. And we're just starting to kind of try to frame this now, but looking at a range of scenarios, right? So, you know, like the Ashby example, can you change the access to the station, you know, and is that possible? That would get analyzed, and we're trying, you know, we'll figure out how that might happen. But, or, you know, smaller blocks versus larger blocks, and, you know, the cost of that, or the cost of, you know, even open space, or, you know, different pieces that aren't directly, you know, housing or buildings. So that will be part weighed in the study. And hopefully in a range. So we, you know, we look at, you know, maximum, yeah, and then minimum, and try to find a balance. And so that's what we're planning.
Do other folks, Charles, Michelle, who we haven't heard from, did you want to ask any questions or make any comments so far? I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. And if not, anyone can jump in.
Can I ask a technical question? And I'm happy to cede the floor at any moment here too. So Karen, one question that I had, or maybe this is also Abby and Rachel, is the surface, sort of what I think are called the off-site surface parking lots at North Berkeley BART were presented as they're going to stay parking in the first CAG meeting. And I wanted to kind of return to that question and ask, could they be used for like open space or other uses, other community desired uses that did not require the heavy structure that you know, housing or buildings would be. And so I just, you know, if you guys could answer that question maybe in how you present the scenarios in the next CAG meeting, that would be helpful.
Sure. Abby or Rachel,
Want
do
me
you
to-
want to?
I mean, I think we're open. I know Van Meter has been, Karen's been tasked with really looking at the main lot, and that we just want whatever use is going to best support the TOD on that site. So it might be more parking, it might be keeping it as parking, it might be something else. We're flexible. We want the whole project to work together. And so I think that it's just like one of the puzzle pieces, those auxiliary lots, the same way the streets are a puzzle piece and the site is. I think we're flexible. I mean, the biggest thing for us is the structural constraints. And as Rachel's pointed out, you know, the Ohlone Greenway is going to be widened to make it more of a safe path for peds and bikes. So that's already happening. But yeah, we're open. We just want to have it all work together. So what we're ending up with, like at you know, we have other stations with small auxiliary lots, and you know, some of them are going to be accommodating more BART operations, for example, like station agent parking, or you know, various functions. So we just need to make it all fit.
Oh, Peter, you can just chime in. You're so good.
No.
And I'm not trained. I see the raised hand
I'm trying to
function.
learn.
I need to learn too, so go ahead.
Can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah, go for it, Rachel.
I have to take advantage because my family all of them stopped screaming at the same time, and that's probably gonna last for just a few seconds. What was I gonna say? Oh, on the auxiliary lots, and I thank you, Abby, for responding to that. It's important just to keep in mind, as you know, as part of the parking conversation, the cost of building structured parking. So having part of the parking solution be provided by those lots is, I just want to make it clear that there's a big financial consideration there. You know, so just to be clear on that one.
Well, we're not going to be outside. Okay, Peter.
So the one suggestion I was going to make, and Karen, you were laying out kind of a sequence and kind of a set of buckets that we would address things, which makes perfect sense. But back to the point that Elizabeth and others have made about, you know, the zoning, a lot of it's kind of baked into this already from the BART or from AB 2932. It might be helpful really early on to put on the tables a basic zoning analysis or kind of envelope, and particularly around the question of the FAR. So we really understand what that translates to. And I don't necessarily understand how it gets applied in this case, but you know, the FAR of 4.2, depending on how it's done, might be actually what the real envelope is, more so than the 75 unit minimum density and you know, 7 stories and stuff. But anyway, however it's done, I think just graphically having something that we can all start to understand. For instance, a question I heard on the side was, you know, was when you do a floor area ratio, does, for instance, in North Berkeley, does that apply to all the space that's not buildable? Or does it only apply to the space that's judged to be buildable? And then how do you decide what's buildable and what's not? And that goes to the details of how the law is written and then how BART's regulations written. We don't have to figure that out right now, but just to have some of that framed on the table, it might avoid a lot of sort of, you know, or just move us forward or prepare us for the conversation about zoning and building form when we get to it.
Right. And that question about what does the FAR apply to actually is a huge determinant of the form, right? How bulky it is. Okay, I mean, yes, and I think that will definitely be part of the next meeting, starting to think about those and sort of how, and Abby's slides that she showed also kind of try to get at that issue about, you know, you've got the box of the 7 stories and how does a project fit within that. And I've had to look back at those, you know, many times to kind of get my head into it. So I think that would be the starting point. And then, yeah, starting to look at how that shapes up on the site. Definitely.
Yeah, and it may just be that taking Abby's slide and putting kind of an FAR diagram within it showing, and this is what an FAR of 4, that we don't have to build the maximum, or 3.5 looks like within that envelope.
Right. On the station, right? On that particular spot too.
Right. So yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that applying the state minimums to the actual sites would be a really helpful exercise. Also, just for me personally to understand how many units are we talking about as the zoning minimum.
Right.
Right, because an FAR of just well, we're into the details, you know, an acre is 43,000 square feet. So an FAR of 4 times, if it applies to housing, which I assumed it does, multiply, you know, the acreage times 4 is 170,000. You can easily get a unit for every 1,000 square feet, but, you know, particularly affordable units. So, you know, right there, you could be 160 or 170 units per acre. And that's just, you know, and so I might be completely missing something about the math, so don't anybody quote that, but just doing that very initial rough calculation for us.
I think we'll definitely include information that you're talking about in terms of running through zoning and AB 2923. And we're trying to make sure, I think one thing that we're just trying to make sure is how we fit it all in a manageable sequence. Do we have to do it outside of CAG meeting number 2 before? Do we do it at CAG meeting number 2? You know, there's definitely, we're grappling with how we fit it all in, but point well taken in terms of that's that's needed.
Right. And one thing that I really like about this format, like we're not sharing slides now, so we can actually see each other's faces and have a conversation.
Yeah.
I want to try to bring some of that to the CAG meeting so that there's a time where we can turn off the presentation and talk together. So hopefully there'll be more of that too. So it's less just presenting and then waiting for, like that there's more communication, I think, between us.
So what's magic about 4 CAG meetings?
There's nothing magic about it. And I think we had our little asterisk on the slide. Number of meetings may change. This is our conceptual schedule of what seems to work together in terms of the MOU milestones as well as the EIR work. So I think, like we said, if there is a way that we need to, be more flexible and, add a meeting or two, or within reason, of the scope and budget that we have, or, again, use community meetings to that purpose, we have flexibility with that.
So did we get this and I missed it? Is there a schedule of our deadlines? Like we have to have zoning we have to get EIRs done? I mean, that would be really helpful to know what we have to do by when as well.
Yeah, and we can, those deadlines, I think I hit on the high level deadlines when we showed the graphics about the process. But overall, right now, the MOU has us having zoning by, June 2021. So before then, we will get, our intention is to, the goal pre-shelter in place was to get to the Planning Commission and start to have some draft zoning proposals in December, so that we could have the zoning to the council, and by June. So the MOU outlines December Planning Commission as a target, as well as December, as Abby mentioned, for the city to have the information from the zoning scenarios and the economic feasibility to be able to have decision makers make some decisions about set asides for local affordable housing money, like the Measure O money. So that's where the 4 CAG meetings and getting things in by December, that's where it came from.
Okay. Why are we starting so late then?
Well, our intention was to have our meeting, our first meeting in April. April 13th, I believe, was the first meeting that we talked about. And then we had the shelter in place order, and then we had to figure out, a new way of meeting. So that's where we landed right now, instead of being on target with starting in April.
We'll just refer back to the West Oakland article. They had a CAG. That was a 5-year process.
Yeah, there are definitely, different timelines for talking about like specific again, I guess it's whether we're getting into, we're trying to have the conversation that we can have around zoning and development parameters to get us to that point. Could we have longer conversations? Will this CAG still be talking after the zoning? It's quite, the council report and the MOU, talks about that as being a definite possibility. So, because we don't know where, we'll get to development parameters. Like the ideal scenario is that we'll have development parameters in place that go to an RFP. I think that whether or not, depending on more information we'll have about funding or more studies that we'll need to do, there will likely be continuing conversations that this CAG or, this CAG or a different iteration of this CAG will need to have on a, you know, continuing basis through those other phases of TOD development. Right now, we're just in the preliminary planning stage.
The West Oakland CAG was formed by the developer. And it's something we always require of our developer to come up with. I mean, if the city has a community process that is working, we will, you know, we'll make that developer fit within that community process. But usually as part of the RFQ, RFP, we require the developer to tell us what their community process is going to be, and it's something we kind of rate them on. So yeah, I mean, BART is committed. We will have some kind of community process during the development phase itself. But that one in particular, that was completely developer led.
Well, if there's nothing but, if there's not community process in Berkeley, that seems to be all of what we ever do. It does
That's
kind of cart
okay.
before the horse, though. I mean, access before the RFP before we have even development guidelines and goals. Just, I don't know.
well, what,
So go ahead, Karen.
I
I
take
was-
up a lot of time, and I want to make sure that Lily and Charles and Peter have time too, but I can continue to fire away as well.
Fire away, Elizabeth.
It's clear you don't know me very well, Peter. Yeah, I mean, I guess from my notes from the other night too, it's just basically what I just said. What happens after the developer's been chosen and there's parameters for that? How much room is there for actually what can get built? We also seem to have some assumptions about it being a nonprofit developer. I don't know why we necessarily want to assume that out of the bag.
I am so sorry, folks. I have 30 seconds that I just need to find my husband to manage this thing for my kid, and I will be right back.
I'm amazed my dog hasn't walked through yet. He likes to come and say hello usually.
I've got a visitor too. So
luckily my family's out of the house. But so we just went through a similar process from the development team side for Balboa Reservoir in San Francisco. And there, the CAC group, and Peter we were working together on that. You know, they stayed on as the development process was happening, and they're there. You know, they were the champions of the parameters. Basically, are we meeting the expectations? Are we, you know, so their role continued for 2 years after we were chosen. And I think that they, you know, there was a lot of input during that period too. It wasn't, you know, it definitely was not a done deal. Lots of things changed from the initial proposal. And yeah, so I could see, you know, there's still shaping that happens even after the developer is chosen or the RFP comes out.
We've done the timing in all different ways. I mean, out at North Concord, we picked a developer using a request for qualifications before the zoning was complete. You know, we did a really intensive RFQ and then RFP at Lake Merritt that was pretty prescriptive, and it just really is going to vary by the site. And I agree. I think one of the questions that I'm hoping the CAG can help us address is the question of, is it that important to have a nonprofit developer? Because that really affects how we do business. I mean, there are a lot of nonprofit developers who can't handle an 8-acre site with massive infrastructure problems, and we're taking them off the table if we make that choice. So I think these are all things we really have to weigh, because every decision that you guys make is going to have bearing on how we do the solicitation, for sure. So yeah, point taken. Yeah, I'm glad that you're flagging it.
That actually makes me happy. We could sort of, I guess I'm still sort of looking for structure. I mean, I almost want to see if we've got these magic 4 meetings, I want to see what the agendas are for all of them. Now, I really do want to see our deadlines laid out. I, like Peter, I don't know anything about zoning. I've been in front of the zoning board because someone tried to put a boarding house up across the street from us, and we stopped them from doing it. So that's how I know about zoning, which was interesting and strange. And I think it does some things and doesn't do others. And Peter's suggestion about like what are we able to do, and what aren't we able to do, and then a little bit of lesson on the implications of that would be very helpful, because if that really is the thing that we must do first, and if that does guide, and that is the box within which we must stay for whatever recommendations we make, right? We have to comply with state law. And then some structure around being able to say, we want housing, but just pretending everybody's just going to get on the bus to go to BART is an absolute fantasy. You know, I mean, if we don't actually look at the transit issues in a more global perspective, just look at New York City right now. No one will get on the subway. You know, we take all the parking away at the stations, guess what's going to happen? And out the window goes our climate change goals, because no one's going to be able to get to the train. So those things, just sort of some structured circular, you know, move through those variables so that we can get to the zoning. Because if we need to hit the deadline, let's do it. And the group can be focused around that. And then if we have a little more leeway, once we all understand the box, if we can actually look at each one of these priorities and how we might balance them against each other, and what the implications are. I mean, I would imagine, I deal with somewhat complex real estate financing, so I have some idea of what it would take for the developer to get financed. I'm astounded you got a developer to bid on something that wasn't zoned. I don't know that I'd put my crew to work to bid and maybe lose on something that you didn't even zone yet. So that was pretty neat. That was a pretty neat trick on your part. But you know, some of the realities of what we want to do and what kinds of developers we might want, and we're going to have to blow up some Berkeley stuff, like nonprofit is not always better, you know, for example, and then I, of course, partly because of what I do for a living, I'm really interested in the economic feasibility. And as a Berkeley taxpayer, I'm definitely interested in the economic feasibility, because we're watching our city council have to deal with a very different reality about Berkeley city budgets than they expected to be working with 6 months ago. And if we have a season of fires, we're not going to get the corresponding downgrade in construction costs, which demand has caused. So anyway, so those things. And then the other thing too is the community meetings. Berkeley, you know, Elisa, I don't know how much you guys spend in Berkeley community meetings, but I'm sure Elisa has. It's rabbit hole city at Berkeley community meetings. And if we need to have some structure around that as well. Otherwise, I think if you looked at our concerns of the 15 of us, and Peter and Lily and Charles, if I misrepresent us, please speak up. But most of us had some concern about the very vociferous, very vocal, sometimes very narrow, outsized input that comes from the folks who spend the time to come to these meetings. And we don't hear from the people who don't have the time or the resources to do so. And anyone, I mean, I think you guys are probably all former Berkeley commissioners. If you've ever sat on a Berkeley commission, you'll know that that's an issue. And I don't want to stop public response, but if we have a limited time, then I think we need to use it and use it well. And also, I mean, I had people asking me, like, what are you guys going to decide and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we are also filters out to the rest of our community. And if we need to be able to tell them, the thing that you care about most will be discussed on this date, show up then. I mean, some of that structure will help us get to the people who are asking us to keep them informed and represent them. And I'm sure this is really frustrating to hear, because I've been on the other side of the equation in business, where you put a lot of work into the structure of how you do something, and then your clients turn around to you and say, where's the structure? I mean, I get that, so sorry about that. But because what is intimately clear to you guys, having lived with this for a year or two, is all new to us. So it's just not as obvious to me how, you know, so if you want to punch me, I get that. That's all I'm saying.
No,
No.
I think that, all of us understand, and I think Peter mentioned this too at one of the many meetings that we had before, maybe it was for the MOU meeting, about the need to be clear about the steps and what's being talked about and have the guide, the roadmap of meetings ahead. And we are really trying to take that to heart. And what we've been hearing too, even though from folks, is that, one side of having the meetings this way is actually increasing participation from folks that, because of either kids or being there in person or something like that, precluded. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects this process moving forward.
As we saw, the Wisconsin Supreme Court voted remotely to state that Wisconsins could not vote remotely. So let's hope we do better than that.
Can I throw just one more thing on the table? Yes, like you, Elise, I want to endorse the idea of the agenda, laying it out as clearly as possible. Elizabeth, I think that's fair. That thing that came up in the first meeting was leadership of the committee internally. And of course, Chris Schilt is the chair, and technically, and in reality, I mean, that was certainly in the direction from council. And so anyway, you guys sort of heard some feedback about that, Elisa and Karen. What are your thoughts about that, and about the, do we need an active chair? And of course, we're all going to have our own thoughts about that. But I just mean, this is, and I just want to second a thank you for this, having this forum to just, informal way, kick these things around. But I'd be interested in your updated thoughts on that.
So we've had conversation with Chris beforehand, and I mean, our thought is for this body to really be able to get down in the nitty gritty, like that you need to be able to just talk and not, I mean, it is not a formal commission or subcommittee. This is more like a working group that has 4 members that are appointees of commissions, and then 11 community members, selected for diverse lived and professional experience. And so that position, I think, was identified as a chair in the sense that, the one of the main products, the zoning, will be in the purview of the Planning Commission. But how we saw this is because we have a professional, I mean, we were looking for a team that had professional expertise in meeting facilitation and community engagement, and did not see that as something to burden one person and one community member, like on the CAG, and with a body that's larger than like a regular commission, a 15 body commission group. So that's why, I mean, I would see this as having, Dave, Javed, and, obviously other folks, Karen on the team, have meeting facilitation engagement experience, but he is the main facilitator, and to use him and use that experience. And what we've talked about with Chris was that, you are the liaison to the Planning Commission, and we look forward to talking through agendas and ideas with you before each meeting as a sounding board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who's the sounding board? I lost you there, Elisa.
Chris Schilt, who's she's the Planning Commission representative.
Yep.
So she is technically the chair, but the chair for this CAG is like not exactly the same role as chairs of other commissions per se.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Lisa, were you suggesting her role is to help you set the agendas and the process? Was that what I heard you say?
Yeah, she would, I mean, as a sounding board, like, but as we were developing these agendas, we, have a call with her. We had a call with her before the first CAG meeting. And she, I mean, this is a role for the other commissioner appointees as well, but imagine that, she would be the liaison and be able to, with staff's assistance as needed, update the Planning Commission on the activities of the CAG. I mean, one thing that
Elisa, could
Holly,
you speak to
well, go ahead.
could you speak to what I heard as another part of Peter's question about process? So if there isn't really a community chair and Dave is facilitating, then what is the and I felt like this question was raised in our last meeting, but not really addressed. Like, what is the process to get to recommendations and suggestions, and how do we have confidence that the final product that goes to Planning Commission and to BART is truly representative of the community views and could be endorsed by the CAG?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say that, we're trying to look at that in terms of how we set up the meetings too, that we have, a system of live polling or some way to elicit, your thoughts on the things that we're showing, so that there is, that there. And that's not getting to the final, this is the final product of these 4 meetings and this gets endorsed. So
I think the other thing that we're envisioning is that, well, we might not have, I guess this is a question, like the exact language to the letter of what the zoning is. We would have, the zoning, like what will be included. So we would know, at least the CAG had discussed and blessed, or this was the extent of like the agreement or disagreement about, it's going to say this about development standards, height, FAR, et cetera. It's going to say this about parking, and also, mention, and this, this is consistent with AB 2923. And then for development parameters, we would have, similar topic areas, and based on the scenarios that, that Van Meter, that Karen and her team are going to present. So we would know, we'd have feedback about like the very specific things, affordable housing targets, et cetera. So, and you would have a chance to, like the CAG would have a chance to discuss, and like we would know what your position, was on that material. Oh, and then I should just mention too, Peter mentioned this at the last meeting. It's not only, and this is something that I forgot to mention, was that there's zoning, there's development parameters, and then there's, the documents that we have based on, that share like kind of a joint vision and priorities document from the city and BART. And so, Peter made a comment about, shouldn't we have some statement of principles? And so I think that too, in terms of guiding, because there might be some unknowns, right? In terms of, we can't spell out everything. Having a refined set of principles or, criteria on which you would base your comments and judgment, like that's a powerful document that we would hope would be part of, the CAG output.
Mm-hmm. But I just want to, but I don't think we're starting from scratch there either, right?
Right.
There's a whole Adeline corridor process and the North Berkeley visioning process, so there's been a lot of work done and things came out of there, right? So that I think that at the next meeting that we would hope, to bring those up and talk about them and see if, the CAG as a group can agree, disagree, discuss where they might, have differences about the outcomes of those processes that took a lot of time and effort to get to where they got, so that we're not going back and starting from zero either. So.
Totally agree. And I don't think anybody, I think everybody I, as a member of the CAG, am very appreciative that all of that community work has been done. I appreciate, Karen, your suggestion of trying to incorporate different modes and methods of input during the meetings. I think polling, and I personally think there are a few things that we probably should be actually voting on, because it's 15 people, and the idea that we're going to get input and a statement from every person on the major decisions, I don't think is realistic in 4 meetings. So I do think it's going to be really important to have a way of soliciting that input in a more rapid and comprehensive mode. And then Alicia, I was just kind of going back to some points that Elizabeth was making. I was a little relieved to hear you talking about potentially adding more meetings in, because as Elizabeth was raising the question about the magical 4 meetings, I was texting you or in the chat just to say, like, I don't think we can really do this body of work justice in 3 remaining meetings. And I think these are like, you know, important discussions for community members to have. And I actually think it's good that we have some deadlines so that we're not doing this for 5 years and something actually, you know, happens at these sites. But I don't know that the 3 remaining meetings are enough to really cover the depth and breadth. So I think, you know, I as a CAG member would love to attend more meetings to be able to just really do the process justice and the sites justice. And then just speaking to Elizabeth's questions about nonprofit developers, I think a lot of times, you know, and I work for a nonprofit developer, I think a lot of times people use that as shorthand for some of the attributes that they want to see in a particular development. And I think in the CAG meeting, it was raised as particularly with respect to affordable housing. And often nonprofit developers commit to longer term affordability. And so it's a more secure and long-term asset for the community. So, you know, whether or not we dictate that there's a nonprofit developer for part or all of the development, I do think it's really important to drive down to what are people really saying when they mean that, because those can be very informative for the RFP and for the development parameters. And when people say that, are they talking about depth of affordability? Are they talking about longevity of affordability? Are they talking about community process? Like, what is it that is important about kind of what I would say is shorthand for nonprofit developer? So that's just a thought there on what we should maybe hear when people are saying that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I'll just, I think that's a well-framed, Lily, and Elizabeth, I would just add that I think on most of these big projects these days of this scale, it's a partnership between a nonprofit or multiple nonprofits and multiple market rate developers. So these are complex teams. So I don't think it's an either or probably situation. But I want to also just agree with Lily about, I don't mind taking some votes. Nothing we do is binding, right? It's advisory, but I think it's going to make it more meaningful if we identify the really challenging subjects and the places where there are real choices for the community to make, and we take our shot at framing those and finding a solution that does the most for the most folks, and we won't have perfect agreement on the balancing of those, but I agree. I think that's kind of it's going to make our work more interesting, and if we really get to those issues and feel like we're having to take real work to getting to real solutions.
Yeah, I think you guys are hearing that we want some structure, and we want some substance, and we want the issues to be defined so that we can focus on them and literally in a focused way. And one of the things that occurs to me is just as what Lily said, was without even realizing that that's what I was doing, that was exactly what I was doing when I was throwing into the bucket of nonprofit development. because we do have a lot of assumptions about the goals of nonprofit developers versus others. And that's just an example of one of the many, many, many topics that you have to have some mastery of to be even remotely helpful. You know, other than just representing Berkeley, the Berkeley citizenry, they're just some basic knowledge points. And one of the things, and this is a bit of housekeeping, but thank you to Justin for sending out our homework. But I went down a bunch of links to get to where I wanted to go. And if it's possible, if there's documentation that we should be reading or things that just, and Justin's email was good, but like literally there's links within links within links within links. And I could not get to it all and do my day job. So some guidance on ways that we can be better prepared so that, and you know, no one's going to be perfect. We all have lives, but even if most of us read most of it, we'll be able to use our time together with some feedback and learning from each other's specific expertise about topics, versus you briefing us and us going, oh, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it that way, but let's do this or whatever. So I don't know, that would be another form of structure, you know. Also, it's like, and you want to cross things off the list, right? I read all my CAG stuff, I'm ready to go.
I completely appreciate that. And thanks for letting us know. We were having too much of a long path to getting you to what you needed.
I mean, you know, I mean, it was a great outline, but the other thing is that was the first one, right? And there's a million things about this. I mean, now I want to go look up, I just looked up Lily on the internet. I'm like, what the hell do these guys actually do? You know, what is it?
You could start with a nice little bio on the mayor's website. Have you seen your own bio on the mayor's website?
No, I read everybody's bios. I'm just saying, but now I'm looking at the place that
Detail.
what you guys actually do. And I know certainly no for-profit developers a little bit how they tick. So,
I'm just looking at the time. I want to apologize again for disappearing like that. This is like the Zoom level of litany of like unprofessional things that you do in professional settings. So I apologize. And also just mention this is really helpful, and we have another session on Friday from 12:30 to 2 if you want to keep on chatting. But we're working on what you're talking about and planning the next meetings with these challenges of number of meetings and structure in mind. So
what did you want to get out of this? I wasn't sure if this was an opportunity for some public comment or.
No, I mean, it was an experiment. And we wanted to allow CAG members get some feedback after that first meeting. If there were things that, you know, you're like, I really didn't understand what they were talking about, and I just want to ask face to face. So I think this worked out. We didn't know how many people would show up, and of course, members of the public were welcome to attend, but it was really keyed into CAG members. So from my point of view, I got a lot of great feedback from having this informal interchange.
Right. I agree. And even just like when thinking, this is what we're doing right now in our team is framing these agendas and, you know, questions for the next meetings and community meetings. So hearing from you is really helpful on how to try to get the structure and and feedback that we need. So structure for you and for us. So that's great. I appreciate it.
We actually did what we were supposed to do. Amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, it's kind of great. It's great if a lot of people show up. It's great if, you know, but just the fact that only there are a few of us here, we had a rather, you know, a lot of time and in-depth back and forth. So that was helpful.
Yep. And good to meet some of our fellow members.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So thank you, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
You know how to get in touch with us, but otherwise, until next time, face to face.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
folks.
Good night.
Bye.